Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. This is what we call these 125 chats with the Libertarian Party of Florida that we offer for the party, also to encourage people to support the party, and we bring in guests and interact on issues that really matter to us and that really matter to people in general. Today, we're joined by Jodi James, President CEO of Florida Cannabis Action Network, who has spent some considerable amount of time challenging the drug prohibition laws across the nation, actually, and has been a veteran of several, and she can talk about this, of course, several campaigns to pass medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, cannabis reform at a state level, like state referendums. And without further ado, I don't want to steal her thunder, Jodi James.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Let's see how this works. Okay. All right. Are you seeing a big red X?
Yes.
All right, then we're all in. We see what I can see. Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. My name is Jodi James, and it has been my honor to be part of one of the greatest movements towards liberty and freedom that there ever was, according to an icon in the movement, Jack Herer. He believed that this was our liberty, and many of the people who mentored me along the way have given me some very interesting ideas about what cannabis is and what it should be. But you asked me to talk about the state of the state. So my objectives with you guys tonight are pretty simple. We kind of want to just give you an overview of what the landscape is. I want to talk really briefly, give you a glimpse of what's happening at the national landscape and how Florida Can is impacting that. And we're just going to really briefly touch on what's happening in the United Nations. So I was having a lot of fun with these pictures. The marijuana is one of our very, very favorite pictures out there. It was taken by Dr. Greg Gerdeman, and we firmly believe in the whole plant. And, you know, I think the topic tonight really is, how did we get from here to there? And here being, you know, this big, beautiful plant, and there being this universal THC symbol and a ban on gummy bears. But we're going to talk about more of these things. That my husband told me how to do this. They tell me that when you do this, you are supposed to tell the audience why you're credible. So I picked out some of my favorite pictures. Interesting, Ed, you were talking about Kevin Applin, and that grainy picture there in the second one over, that is Kevin Applin in 1996, 1995. No, 1996.
Right. I remember he left Pennsylvania right around then.
That was, I had to think about it. That is actually 95. And this would have been the Gainesville Hemp Fest. And from this event and others like it, Cannabis Action Network was actually able to make law at the 11th Circuit Court. And if you go someplace in Florida, Georgia, or Alabama and want to have a pure free speech event, you can do that. And it should cost you nothing, no insurance, no nothing, because that is what our public venues are for. Over on the left-hand side is a picture of me and some of my girls. And you probably can't tell, but we're doing the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And that was really when this whole hemp industry started to come together. Some of you will recognize that House District campaign sign. Yes, I have run for office. And for those of you who've been around more than a minute, that is Judge Jim Gray. And Judge Gray ran as the vice presidential candidate on a ticket with Governor Gary Johnson. He calls me friend JJ, and of course I call him, well, Judge Johnson. So I will tell you, I think that a lifetime does make a difference. And in the time that we have been doing this, Ed and I, from 1996, when there was less than 30% of the population support for legalization, to where we are now, we've come a long ways. If you are looking at the national chart, you'll see that while it was 96 when we passed our first medical marijuana bill, that's Proposition 215 in California. Ed alluded to that when he was talking about some of the work of Dennis Perone and some of the heroes of the medical marijuana movement like that. Oregon has actually been passed since, and Colorado have had legalization for adults for more than a decade, or going on a decade this year. I think that's fascinating. Of course, there's marijuana everywhere now, and that started in 2018. And today we have 23 legal states plus Washington, D.C., and of course, medical states everywhere. So to figure out where we're going to be, and you never know where people are starting from. So I wanted to kind of figure out where we're going to be going, and wanted to make sure, first of all, that you guys kind of understood some of the terms that we're going to be using. So when Florida Cannabis Action Network talks about marijuana, cannabis, we're usually talking about this raw cannabis up here. When you heat the raw cannabis, it changes a little bit. When you age the cannabis a little bit, it changes. And then you can chemically alter the cannabis. And when you chemically alter the cannabis with things like acid washes, you can create a volume of cannabinoids that are starting to be popular on the shelf: Delta 8, Delta 10, THCO, HHC. And quite frankly, 35 years ago, somebody might have known about these minor cannabinoids, but most of us were focusing on what we could get in THC. And that's because even though the cannabis we were getting may not have been the best cannabis, even old cannabis is starting to degrade into things like CBN. And CBN, as you can see from this chart, actually affects things like seizure disorders. So I'm going to provide Hector a set of these slides when we're done. Nothing that we have done here isn't something that you could find someplace else, though I do have a copyright on some of the things that are particularly flaming. I figure that way, if anybody gets in trouble for it later, it'll be me. But we know that cannabis is good medicine. We know that people are using it. We know that we practically grew up with it. And in Florida right now, which is where we're starting, people are using cannabis. I think the interesting quandary that we have here is that cannabis in the state of Florida is both 100% legal and 100% illegal. So I tried to kind of lay out who's who and who has access. At one point, probably 5 years ago, I would have said that cannabis was legal, but it was legal by like dynamite. Now, really, you're getting products in every location. They're in the grocery stores. There's no place you can't go and get cannabis products. And most of it, for the most part, is going to be legal for you if you are an adult in the state of Florida. Because of the hemp bill, that would be actually, I should be more specific, that's the 2018 U.S. Farm Act. Hemp under 3% THC is legal for everyone. Now, the Florida legislature this past year did put, I should sit up straight, look like, one of those newscasters. The Florida legislature this past year did put some limits on purchase. So it is now illegal for one of your head shops to sell a low THC or hemp product to a minor. Now that minor can possess it if you are a parent and your child is thriving on CBD products, you can still go to the store and purchase them. You can deliver them to your child, but the child can't purchase them. Now, I did make a difference. This cannabis over 3% THC, that is like what everybody is getting all of the time, and we have been for the last, forever. That is still 100% illegal, and it's illegal for everybody. You may not possess cannabis over 3% THC. And that's not just the US law that, or the Florida law, that's also the federal law. Of course, that's Schedule 1 drug. People talk about that all the time. If you are a qualified patient, you can go and purchase low THC or what's called medical marijuana. And it's funny, for probably 2 decades, the movement itself argued as snobs about whether we were going to call it marijuana or cannabis. And some people still called it weed, and it was ganja, and, as the kind bud. And we fought those fights and internally had people really get mad at each other. And then the legislature called it cannabis, which is something that we were working towards, because that is its biological, where it would be classified. And then John Morgan came around and wrote his initiative in 2014 and called it medical marijuana. So today, if you use something that would be classified as cannabis as your medicine, and you get it from a licensed store, you are actually buying medical marijuana. Thank you, John Morgan. Now, I brought up what we were dealing with there at the United Nations, and the United Nations is in the process of rescheduling cannabis, because that's really flipping important. The United Nations, and one of our board members, Mike Crowitz, who also works with Veterans for Medical Cannabis, has been working at the United Nations for nearly 30 years. And his work led to them working with the WHO to do investigations and provide them with ample medical evidence to show that this does not need to be treated as a Schedule 1 drug, which is the way we've got it in the US. And at the United Nations, it's actually Schedule, 4? Theirs is backwards. 5 is the least restrictive or most restrictive. 4 is less, and 4 allowed for medicine. And I think this is interesting, because that's why for the last 40 years, so much of the research that people have been getting have come from outside the United States, because really it was never about not being able to use it medicinally. All over the world, they've been using it medicinally and traditionally, and that was never a violation of the Single Convention Treaty. But the United States took the Single Convention Treaty, built on it with the Controlled Substance Act, further invaded our privacy with the Drug-Free Workplace Act. And of course, the Drug-Free Workplace Act was passed as a savings to taxpayers. We're going to make sure that taxpayer dollars aren't going to businesses that employ druggies. Of course, this alphabet soup of regulation has brought in the Justice Department, who works with the DEA and HHS, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and of course now with the Farm Act, the USDA. And even though this is a plant that we can grow in our backyard, even though in 2016 we passed a medical marijuana amendment, and even though we have the 9th and 10th Amendment to the Constitution, we still have no access to marijuana. So I hope you appreciate that there are a lot of obstacles between you and Joe Weed, but Florida Can's got your back. And we have been trying to educate people on kind of how this goes. This is a flyer, and again, it's cut and pieced, but it kind of gives people an idea that even though all cannabis is that same flower that we looked at in that same picture, In the state of Florida, we have 3 regulatory bodies that are in charge of marijuana. You have marijuana that's regulated with the Department of Agriculture, and that's our hemp program. That was started under Democrat Nikki Fried, excuse me, and now falls under the dominion of Commissioner Wilton Simpson. Now, this hemp program, it approves seed production, it licensed growers, there are inspections, and there are ways to get a license to be a retail seller. So that in and of itself is working out, we thought, pretty well. Nikki Fried was pretty excited about it, and everybody seemed to be getting along pretty well. But we did start to see some issues, enough issues that Florida Cannabis Action Network actually started a safety first program and talked about things like, don't take candies from strangers. Guys, I see that someone is trying to get in. If one of our co-hosts can admit your friend, that'll give me just a second. Of course, medical marijuana, as laid out in the initiative that passed in 2016, that's regulated by the Department of Health. So under that statute, 381, they license doctors and producers, they license patients and caregivers, and they make sure that they certify testing labs. If you are a testing lab in Florida testing medical marijuana, you can also test hemp products, and hemp products are by law supposed to be tested. So if you are buying over-the-counter products from your grocery store or your health food store or your tobacco shop or your head shop, those products are supposed to be tested as well. But we always recommend, and this was part of our Safety First campaign, that you get in there and you check to see where those QR codes go. And check to make sure that if there's more than one product by the same vendor, that they aren't showing the same certificate of analysis. Some of these products are very safe, and you can have a really enjoyable experience with them. And some of them are going to be really dangerous, and people have been hospitalized. And the difference is really being a wary consumer. We kind of think it's fascinating that some of the marijuana out there is still on the in the legacy market. However, if you are purchasing cannabis from the legacy market, nothing has changed much in the last 20 years. Possession of cannabis over 3% THC is, 0.3% THC is still a crime. Possession of more than 20 grams is still a felony. Any sale of cannabis without a license is a felony. You can still get driving under the influence, and you can still lose your kids. I know one of the Joshes was saying that, working in family court, and, that this becomes an issue in child custody to this day, despite having medical marijuana and it being lawful for people who have a medical card. So while the hemp industry has been growing, there has been a lot of controversy. This last legislative session, some of the folks from the Libertarian Party got out and spoke on a proposed bill that would have really damped down the hemp industry. It was a horrific bill that not only would have destroyed the vendors that were edgy, but it also would have put vendors who were 100% following the law out of business. I say here that the DEA is systematically trimming the industry, wink, wink, nod, nod. But they really are. They're starting to talk about and make a big deal about the HHC, the HHO, the Delta 8s, the Delta 9 derived from hemp. These kind of products are getting a great big fat no-go from the DEA. And I will tell you that Wilton Simpson is not pro-pot. Operation Candy Crush was in the news recently. I think I've got a link in this, so when you get this presentation from Hector later, you'll be able to find the link, or you can just do a little Google search. I'm not disappointed to see these products gone. A Jolly Rancher, you'll see that some of them are trolls. They look just like Sour Patch Kids. And anybody who thought that they were going to get away with that in a legal market, knowing how hard it is and how much people pay for trademark and how much people spend to get their brand recognized, it's not surprising that this is the first product to get pulled from the shelves. But we have seen just recently a business owner get arrested for possession of, I believe it was Delta 8 in his legitimate licensed business. And I've certainly been telling the business owners that we work with that might have products that are Delta 8, Delta 9, to make sure that they are definitely making sure that everybody's 21 that is purchasing it, but to also be prepared. It is very possible that we will see arrests again. And if you are seeing that in your community, I think that becomes an excellent point of an opportunity to start talking to city councils and things like that. So I hope you'll keep your eyes open for that. I do believe that that's what we're going to start seeing. There is, and I forgot to mention on that last slide, that this hemp industry, when it was under attack in the 2023 legislative session, was able to raise more than $1 million. It seemed to me it was almost 1.5 million, but I didn't want to get quoted on that. I know it was over 1 million. We were told that it came a lot from Chinese suppliers. And some of these folks were coming in and giving testimony that they are creating these Delta 8 products, these Delta 9 products, these HHC products, and they employ over 100 people. And if you've been paying attention to this as long as Ed and I have, you know that that's RICO, dude. You got 100 people out there selling your illegal weed. So don't be surprised if we don't start to see some big pushes. But we do have some big players in this state. And you'll recall that one of the things I said we were going to touch on is the idea that we have a lot of impact on what is happening federally. And we do. We have some impact individually at the United Nations because we're all part of Cannabis Action Network. And if you weren't, you can see the little thing and you know how to join, and you certainly can be. Florida Cannabis Action Network, through our representative, Mike Crowitz, we have an opportunity to impact what's happening in the United Nations and the WHO. And Florida Can has really been using that influence. But when it comes to the federal level, some of these names that you might recognize from my screen, and I was a little bit sad. I was trying to muck up all of their logos. I didn't want any of them to be really good and really clear, but it turns out that truly fluent in health, Liberty Health Science, whoever designed their logo, it just goes where it's supposed to go. Because I'm like, none of these guys are giving me any money to do this presentation. Why should I put their logo on it? But these guys have federal lobbyists, and they are really spending a lot of their energy impacting what's happening at the federal level. Now, I don't know that they're going after the Drug-Free Workplace Act, because that's not really important to them, but that's really important to me. The Drug-Free Workplace Act is one of the things that's going to keep people from using cannabis in hospitals, because hospitals receive more than $100,000 in federal funds passed through the state. And this past legislative session, Gail Harrell, a senator from the Treasure Coast, added a rider to the mental health bill that said any facility that provides mental health services in the state of Florida has to prohibit all use of cannabis, even hemp. And she pointed to the Drug-Free Workplace Act for that. But again, Florida Cann's got your back and we've got a plan. These were the original 5. The original 5 got their licenses in 2022. There were actually when the implementing bill, of course, we passed, and I have a mistake on this. So Hector, give me an extra day before I send it, because it is actually 2017 Florida statute that is the implementing bill for the 2016 initiative. So forgive me for that. The 2017 Florida statute implementing bill said that for every 100,000 patients in the registry, we would add 4 additional licenses, and they were going to grant 5. Now, those 5 licenses came from a 2004 piece of legislation from 2014 that was about low THC. There were 22 applicants for that round, and the original 5 licenses were awarded in 2017. Now, interestingly enough, through litigation and ultimately through legislation, the legislature passed a bill that said anyone from that original application cycle who scored blah, 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 blah within blah, blah, blah of this next one was going to be given a license. And the process was so poorly done in 2017 that all 22 applicants were awarded licenses. And so on that last slide, you didn't see things like Jungle Boys, and you don't see things like, oh, I don't even know who else is out there these days. But there are actually 22 that have a license in the state of Florida to produce cannabis, to process it into various extracts and formulations, and then distribute it. They have to be what is called vertically integrated. So they have to do the whole thing. They have to know how to grow, they have to know how to process, and they have to be expert retail people. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of businesses that aren't doing very well. Cookies, for example, is having some problems in Florida. You've heard of MedMen. They've been in and out of the state. Sunburn, I guess, is out there these days. When we passed that original legislation in 2017, we were supposed to give 1 award to a Black farmer. And that's not just any Black farmer. That is a Black farmer that was a member of the Pidford litigation, which had to do with discrimination at the USDA more than 35 years ago. That Pigford farmer application wasn't even made available until recently. And so at this point, there was 1 Black farmer's license that was supposed to be awarded. It went through the application cycle. There were as many problems with the second application round as there were with the first application round. And in subsequent legislation in 2023, the legislature has basically said that if you applied and you qualified, that you're going to get a license if you are a Black farmer. So up on the top right-hand side, you'll see some red numbers. That first number is the number of licenses we have now. 12 is the number of potential licenses that we are going to have after the Black farmers is all figured out. And if you'll recall, we get that 4 licenses for every 100,000 patients, and we are far enough down the line now that 22 additional licenses are due. In April of this year, 74 people applied for those 22 licenses. So I wanted to do this because the most important things that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks and months is, are we going to legalize it, right? Because you can't get to the state of the state without getting here. when you talk to the hemp industry and they tell you to oppose the Smart and Safe Florida initiative, they say this initiative will not add any extra licenses, and nobody who is not a major player will be able to get into the business. What the legislation actually, what the proposed initiative actually says is that people who already have a license, those 22 plus 12 plus 22, maybe plus 52, because all of those 74 people who don't get a license in this round are going to sue. And if the legislature does exactly what they have done before, they're likely to get theirs license. So that's why this 56 could really have another 50. So then we talk about, do we need 100 marijuana companies in the state of Florida? Is that enough to supply the adult population? Will these businesses be able to be competitive? And of course, what happens to the hemp industry, which is really where the small guy's at right now? Well, we have not legalized it yet, but that is going to be the discussion this year, guys. The Supreme Court has yet to hear the oral arguments. I was on the phone with the campaign director day before yesterday. They have ceased their collections. They are well over the threshold for Supreme Court review. Now, I do want to point out there, because we were talking very briefly at the beginning about how much passion we have for citizens' initiatives. My understanding is that True Leaf spent $40 million to get enough signatures to get their ballot position. So I'm sure that it can be done a little bit cheaper if you don't have $40 million, but I would hate to figure how much cheaper, because even 20 years ago, running a statewide campaign was a $14 million ad buy for a Democrat like Senator Bill Nelson. And that was before the breakup of the major media markets. So something to think about there. It certainly has not passed. I'm on the fence with this initiative, and as much as I would like to be able to grow my own, as much as I would like to see many, many small businesses take part in this, I am hard pressed to say that 20 million adults should continue to be criminalized for possession of 3 ounces of marijuana in the state of Florida. So this is kind of where the battleground's going to be. I did promise you that we were going to talk a little bit about the impact of cannabis on what's happening at the national level. And of course, we can't go very far without considering the impact of Governor Ron DeSantis in the Republican primary. So Ron DeSantis, of course, the first bill that he signed when he got into office allowed for smokable marijuana. But in 2022, when he was asked about legalization, his answer was, I don't like the smell. Well, in all fairness, we'd had a whole bunch of really dank plants in the Capitol the day before, and the place really stunk like pot from the 21st floor all the way down to his office. And so I can understand that, but he has been saying that he is not in favor of legalization. So I don't know how that bodes for the 23 states that have already legalized it, should this man become president. And then I would be doing a disservice to my organization if I did not plug the gun case that we have been working on for the last several years. Many of you will have been following what's happening pardon me, due to federal regulation, it is illegal to be in possession of cannabis and a firearm. There are no exceptions to it. There are a lot of people who will tell you there are exceptions to it. Now, you might be able to get off on it if you are Hunter Biden, but if you are a medical marijuana patient in the state of Florida, and you go in to buy a firearm through a licensed firearm dealer, and you check that little box that says you use marijuana, I mean, telling the truth, then they are going to deny you the ability to buy a gun. Vera Cooper is a almost 80-year-old woman from the Panhandle. She has been running the family business since the 1960s and took over for her husband when he passed. She is a lifelong Republican in the Panhandle. And when she went to buy a handgun for her own protection, she was denied. Around that same time, Nicole Hansel, who is a Hispanic woman from Miami, she runs her own photo studio and she likes to travel with her 3 children. Her special ops husband is often deployed. They met when she was a captain in the U.S. Army Reserve in Afghanistan or Iraq. Oh, I'm sorry, in the Middle East. And she was injured when a IED exploded on her unit. And when she went in to buy a firearm, she was likewise denied. Neil Franklin is a retired Baltimore police officer who moved to Florida. He and his doctor believed that he could be treating some of his ailments with medical marijuana and that he would qualify. Neil applied for a card, received his card, and then returned his card because it is illegal to have a medical marijuana card and a federal issued carry permit, which he has as a decorated officer. So we are headed to the 11th Circuit in Jacksonville for oral arguments on October 3rd. And we're very excited about the idea that these 3 wonderful plaintiffs going up against the Attorney General and the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and explosives, may very well be able to change precedent on law when it comes to firearms. So I'd like to welcome all of you to join us at Cannabis at the Capitol. We bring people together for a couple days of education and opportunities. We make appointments, we have some fellowship, we do some training, and we make sure that when it comes to cannabis, that the people that represent you know who you are, and that when they have questions about what's happening with cannabis, that it is you that they are asking, because we need to make sure that more people like us have a voice in the Capitol. And so that's what we do. And I appreciate the opportunity. Hector, thank you very much for being a member of Florida Can and participating. We have a fabulous team, and everything that we have been able to accomplish over the last 25 years is because people like the ones on this call have picked up the Can banner and done amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi, for joining us today, giving this wonderful talk. I will plug you a little bit more and say, and the organization that is, and say that you spend a lot of time in Tallahassee. Every legislative session, the organization basically takes out a house, rents a house for the period of basically 3 months, opens it up for volunteers to come in and shelter. Go almost every day to the Capitol building and meet with legislators, talk at committee meetings, and it's been a wonderful opportunity that obviously is extended to everybody here on the call to participate in. Cannabis at the Capitol is technically a 1-day event, but there's always activities happening that week too. Whenever that date's set. I went last year; it was great, and I think at this time I would like people who have any questions to have an opportunity to ask them. Yeah, how much time do you have? Just let us know.
Oh, well, I figured we were going an hour, and so I tried to make sure that I left people a little bit of time for questions, and if we need a little bit more, let me know.
Okay, so you can either raise your hand or just start talking. I see a question.
I got a question for you, Jodi. On this morning's SAFE initiative, we have over 1 million signatures now. Is it definitely going to be on the ballot? I heard the Attorney General is coming against it.
No, it's not definitely going to be on the ballot. It has qualified for its ballot position, but the Supreme Court still has to hear oral arguments. Now, I sat down with one of the attorneys. I've been very blessed in my position with Cannabis Action Network, and I asked to sit down with one of the attorneys and ask some really serious questions because, you know, a lot of people count on Florida Cannabis Action Network to make sure we have the right answers. I've reviewed it. I've reviewed what the courts have done before. If this were not a court that was a political court appointed by and beholden to Governor DeSantis, I would say there is absolutely no way that this doesn't make Supreme Court review. At this point, I think it has a high likelihood of succeeding. They put some great legal minds to it, and they have spared no expense in making sure that they dotted their I's and crossed their T's. But, you know, we still have to hit a 60% threshold. So even if it gets on the ballot, we still have to convince 60% of the population that things will be better if we take this next step and allow adults to use cannabis without being criminalized. And a lot of it's going to be in our language.
Well, you know, we got the first step in. There's 1 million people that signed those petitions. I sent many, many of them in. And I don't think, I don't think that they should stop us. Let's take it to the second step. I agree 60% is a strong threshold. A lot of states are moving that way. It used to be 50% in a lot of states, but they're moving away from, direct democracy. And I would like to see it on the ballot at least. Then we can see how the people feel.
Well, it'll take a lot of work after it gets on the ballot, but I'm with you, Ed. I think it belongs on the ballot. There are a lot of lawmakers who I think would be more comfortable moving forward with a mandate.
A mandate instead of being on, it's like, I think that we got to quit putting people in prison for it first off. And, it's ridiculous. So many people are still getting arrested and we don't know about it. And people think it's legal, but it's not. And that should be the first mandate they make.
All right. Jodi, I had a question for you about actually a little bit follow up on what Ed said in regards to the criminal justice reform portion of this, particularly starting with the Biden administration announcing that they were going to pardon a number of people who've qualified for nonviolent possession arrests in the federal system, and really the feeling of where that's going with the federal administration.
Well, a lot of people got excited about that. I'm a skeptic when it comes to Joe Biden, quite frankly. I showed you my pedigree and my timeline, and you have to realize that when I started doing this, I became aware of these issues, would have been in the mid 80s. And that was then Congressman Biden talking about tough on crime and the war on drugs. So he was a drug hawk. So it's very hard for me to believe that leopards change their spots. And while the administration pardoned some folks for nonviolent offenses, you have to remember that that was playing out on the stage of Dorothy Grimes and what was happening in Russia. So was that the Biden administration showing that they were ready to start conceding that adults should not be criminalized for cannabis? Or was that them covering the State Department's ass for trying to get Brittany Grimes home from Russia? I would say it was the latter. Because you've got to remember one of the first things that Biden did when he got into office was drug test the West Wing and fire people who couldn't pass piss test. Welcome to the Drug-Free America agenda. And he has really been part of Drug-Free America's agenda forever. There is no state in the country that has legalized either for medicine or for recreation that has had a grand plan for where this suddenly now legal where marijuana comes from, right? And one of the first acts of the Justice Department after Biden became president was to arrest the guys that were bringing marijuana into, what was it, Oklahoma? And, it was a little bit on a plane. So, what is it? The Indian saying, methinks he speaks with forked tongue. So, I think that Congress is gridlocked. I think that we have, the 9th and 10th Amendment should already cover me and I shouldn't have to deal with these people. But I'm not enthusiastic, and I will tell you that I was a Democrat when Clinton's people said, just give Bill 4 more years and he will legalize marijuana. And I was in a room with people who had just come back from the White House, the Obama White House, who said to me, yes, Jodi, I know you're disgusted with Barack Obama and but look at all the good things he's done. Well, yes, I know that marijuana is your only issue. Give him 4 more years. So I'm certainly not going to give Biden 4 more years just because he might want to legalize marijuana. Now, if he legalizes marijuana, it all depends on who the Libertarians put up. That's going to be that's going to be my story.
All right. Anybody else have questions? Joshua?
No, I'm good.
All right. I just wanted to see if you could circle back and if we could go over a quick history on the process that over the development of law as it goes with self-grow and THC content. It's a little complicated, I know, but try your best.
So you're trying to get, so right now there is nothing
Context,
that
yeah.
there is nothing that is being proposed that would allow for home cultivation, with the exception of a grassroots initiative that is being promoted by a woman by the name of Mariah Barnhart. They don't have any kind of funding. So, and it would be a home grow initiative that is strictly for patients. So is that something that's going to get a whole bunch of people excited? Hard to tell. We have been talking internally, and I spoke to Hector the other day about creating some sort of legislation that would allow for collaboratives or collectives or cooperatives that would allow people to who were licensed patients to cultivate together. So really, everything that I hear when it comes to home grow, that has got to be the biggest challenge. It doesn't pull well, the lobbyists tell me. And even in places like Oregon and Colorado, they've gotten more and more into the idea that your plants have to be in a locked box, someplace where no one can get to them. So, we're really still talking about dynamite in the state of Florida when it's talking about home grow. Now, I am not convinced, and for some of you who might geek with me later, I'm not convinced that we can't still use a medical necessity defense for home cultivation. I think there may very well be some of that. And we have seen people who are getting licenses for hemp, and they are simply not bringing anything to the market. And if you don't bring it to the market, you don't have to have it tested. So there are people who are really using that hemp law. What was the other thing that you wanted me to touch on?
But before you get into that, if you could, people have tried to sue in the past for cancer patients, for instance, to get home grow, or that is home cultivation, and that where'd that end up?
So that's the medical necessity defense that I was referring to. Not everybody realizes that prior to 1996, the friendliest place in the country to get arrested for marijuana was Florida. And I know that seems a little bit odd to say the friendliest place to get arrested. But in 1991, a couple by the name of Ken and Barbara Jinks were living in the Panhandle, and Ken Jinks received a transfusion with blood that was infected with HIV/AIDS. And Barbara and Ken both contracted the disease. Now, in 1991, the life expectancy was low, the number of treatable drugs were few, and the side effects for the drugs that existed on the market were many. So Ken and Barbara Jinks at a support group meeting were told that marijuana was very effective in treating the side effects of AIDS and the side effects of the AIDS medication. They started cultivating cannabis and were arrested. Their attorney at trial presented a medical necessity defense. And basically, Hector, if you and I are walking down the street on a Sunday afternoon and the pharmacies are closed and you get bit by a snake, and I rush to the pharmacy to find it closed, and I bust into the pharmacy and I steal a, because I busted in, I take a snake bite kit and I come and I rescue you. I would not be guilty by reason of medical necessity. The harm that I chose to avert, i.e. you dying of the snake bite, was less than the damage to the window and the harm of taking from them. And there was no other way to do it. There's actually 3 that you needed to qualify. No other way. You'll forgive me if I don't have all of the elements at the top of my head right at this minute. But that affirmative defense, yes, I grew marijuana. Yes, it was for my own personal use. Yes, I am working with a doctor, and yes, I need it. Is the way that patients in the state of Florida were able to cultivate at home for their own personal use since 1992. So we wondered after the 2016 medical marijuana initiative if that would not make it a higher burden to get medical necessity. But I think that what we're seeing in terms of products that are available for patients and the cost, that probably the right patient could litigate that. But again, that's going to be litigation.
Totally understand. And the second part of the question was there has been some legislation regarding restricting THC content even in the medical, and how's that? I mean, this is medicine, right? So you have legislators who aren't doctors legislating on content that are therapeutic.
And really, this is places where they should not go. I'm glad that you pointed out that they're not researchers and they're not doctors. We'll probably see this trend continue. In Alabama, the limits are so ridiculously low that I don't think that most people in Alabama will even be getting a therapeutic dose. The other trend that we're seeing out of Alabama was that if you exceed 50 milligrams of THC a day, you have to give up your driver's license. So right now our limits are nowhere that low. I kind of stopped talking about THC limits when I found out what they did in Alabama. I thought, just be quiet. But we do have THC limits now, not limits on the product, but limits on the amount of products that you can buy. THC limits in a adult market, don't be surprised. I was in Maine this year and it was fascinating. In the 1990s, late 1990s, I would point to the medical marijuana program in Maine, and invariably people would say, Maine has medical marijuana? And my answer would be, yeah, News at 11, program works, right? So no one ever heard about the Maine program. But we were in Maine this summer, and if you went into the medical marijuana, and of course I have a card, and I went in and bought my product was in big jars, and I was able to smell it, and they put it in a little brown bag, and they put it in these little brown rice kind of size containers and sent me on my way. I went into an adult rec because one of the people that was traveling with us didn't have a card, went into an adult rec, and it was like childproof packaging inside of childproof packaging inside of childproof packaging inside of a childproof bag. So it was fascinating. And then there was like a 17% tax. So it'll be very interesting to see how we move from here. The interesting thing, I think maybe Ed pointed it out in the very beginning, there is a very big difference between decriminalizing cannabis and removing criminal penalties and legalizing marijuana, because legalizing, that's what happens with the rules and regulations. That's about who can buy it, who can sell it. So I've learned that I need to be very careful with legalization. So I saw some priorities. I have a lot of things that are in my mind. Obviously, at the federal level, we're going to be looking at that drug-free workplace. The team has not met yet to talk about what our new priorities will be. We kind of regurgitate things. We have a case at the Florida Supreme Court that is on employment law, and certainly employment protection is something that I think is extremely important for people. You need to be able to get access to the medicine that brings you to a state of wellness so that you can get back involved with your life. And for most people, getting back involved with their life, if they've had a serious injury or a serious accident, or have been diagnosed with a serious disease, getting back into their life means getting back to work. So having drug-free workplaces affects all of us. That's very important to me. In 2022, we were able to get telehealth back. That had been one of our ongoing priorities, to make sure that the patients who needed access to their doctors could do that. We'll just kind of see. I have a cooperative bill that I'd like to introduce. Our Veterans Committee want to get veterans exempt from the $75 fee. They'd like to see that enumerated in law. So certainly we'll be carrying the water for our Veterans Committee. But the way this works is that the various committees, members of Florida Cannabis Action Network, they bring us their priorities. Because really, at the end of the day, we are here to make sure that people who can't leave their homes and go to Tallahassee and spend day in and day out arguing for what they need, that they have a voice without paying an expensive lobbyist, and that reciprocally, that we make sure that the people who we're speaking for in Tallahassee know the language to use when they're talking to someone at the water cooler, or when they're talking to a local politician at a fundraiser or an event. And I would like to say to any of the candidates that are participating, I have run a couple times. If you're interested in how to message marijuana policy or broader drug policy, prison reform in your campaign, I would love to be considered part of your kitchen cabinet.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have a question? Well, I think that answered Dale's question there about what's your, Dale's asking specifically, what is your number one priority that you think the Florida Cannabis Action Network is going to focus on in the upcoming session?
Well, and again, I need to be clear that I don't know that we have identified what our number one is at this point. Oftentimes we're playing defense. So on the offense, it's drug-free workplace, federally drug-free workplace. We'll be working with our federal partners to make sure that that gets addressed, because what's standing between, in our opinion, people getting access is this drug-free workplace.
Well,
go ahead.
So just to keep up, to summarize, there's certainly, you've been on the defensive. There's issues of basically consumer protection or consumer advocacy. It's the consumers that this is a consumer based, or in other words, a grassroots organization based on consumers of medical. And that's important.
Recreational.
And recreational, of course. But putting that aside, for our federal friends who may be watching. The point is I think there's some issues that was actually the biggest surprise that I identified with Florida Cannabis Network, actually not Action Network, last year or last legislative year, was issues affecting the Second Amendment, firearm ownership, personal firearm ownership, particularly. If you could expand on that a little bit, both the federal and the state policy. You kind of touched upon the lawsuit that's happening at the federal level with the drug-free workplace, but the federal issue regarding patient-doctor relationship. The affidavit or checklist that the feds are requiring.
You know, I thank you for bringing that up. That is one of the things that we're going to be talking about right now. In Florida statute, they had directed the Department of Health to develop a list of warnings, I guess you would say. I think this is what you're talking about, Hector. A list of warnings, and it's been fascinating to watch. So I apologize for anybody that feels like we're running over. This gun lawsuit has absolutely been fascinating, and if you've been following it from the very beginning, I was on my way to the Panhandle and got a phone call from a guy who said, "Hey, if you are interested in working on this, I'm going to put you in touch with Nikki Fried, who was the Commissioner of Agriculture at the time." And we were particularly interested in this gun issue. There is so much misinformation out there. Commissioner Fried at the time, of course, was issuing concealed carry permits, and she made a really big deal about having both her medical marijuana card and her concealed carry permit. And we had a donor that just was livid about that. And he's like, "You've got to tell people that it is illegal to have a firearm." And I'm like, "Well, I can say that, but people are going to think I'm nuts because the Commissioner of Agriculture is out there saying the opposite." So we've spent a lot of energy on this. And so when the commissioner reached out to us about getting involved with the lawsuit, my team got really excited. We think that this is one of the biggest barriers to people getting involved in the medical marijuana program. Certainly for our veterans who don't want to be on a marijuana list and then get their guns. And we hear this question more and more from people all the time. Can I have both a medical card and possess a firearm? And remember, even if we legalized it in November of 24, if we don't change this statute or this federal law, then you still wouldn't be able to be in possession, because despite the 9th Amendment, despite the 10th Amendment, that federal prohibition on possession of a firearm still remains in effect. So the opportunity, when we started looking at this, the first thing we said is, well, if Nikki Fried isn't governor, and if Nikki Fried isn't the Commissioner of Agriculture in a minute, because we knew she wasn't going to be either, what happens to this lawsuit? And we were able to get commitments from the attorneys that they would carry on the lawsuit. And as we have been watching this, we have seen, of course, for those of you who are paying attention to what's happening, of course, 150 years of gun precedent was thrown out the window in the middle of our case, right? So when we went in, we were arguing for one court under one set of opinions. And then, and you'll forgive me for not remembering the precedent in the New York case, but basically in the New York case, they were like, look, if it wasn't a prohibition when this country was founded, it shouldn't be a prohibition now. So our lawyers had to retool and look at this. And when the Justice Department came back to us, they used this form that Florida patients are forced to sign that says that you know that cannabis is dangerous, and you know that it's untested, and you know that it's deplorable. And you know it can make you crazy, and it can lead to and you have no choice. If you do not sign the document, the doctor is not allowed to recommend for you. So all of these patients, including Vera Cooper and Nicole Hansen, signed these papers that says that this cannabis could cause these things. And so when the Justice Department came back with their first brief, they basically said that people who use cannabis cannot be trusted with guns, that we are like mentally ill, and that we are derelicts like Catholics and Indians. And that because we signed this paper, so we thank you, New York Rifle Association. You know, Bruin is what they is how they're citing it, is Bruin. So I should have I should have known when we signed that paper that it would be used against us, and certainly they did. So one of the projects that Florida Can has going on is a white paper that we're going to be delivering to the legislature that shows that all of these things that the Department of Health and the Florida Medical Association are saying about cannabis aren't true. Fighting the stigma of 100 years of prohibition continues to be one of our main objectives. Protecting people who use cannabis. And I'm sorry, you know, they say on a radio host, you're never supposed to correct the radio host or you don't get invited back. So Hector, you'll forgive me for correcting you. But when we speak in Tallahassee, we say that we are speaking for people who want cannabis, people who need cannabis, and people who use cannabis ahead of the law. So it's not just patients that we speak for. There are an awful lot of people who, for whatever reason, can't participate in this program. There are a lot of people who find that this is their comfort. There are a lot of people who find that this is their spirituality. There are a lot of people who find that this is their glass of wine. And these people don't want to be political junkies. They just want to not be criminals. And we want to speak for them too.
All right. Well, but any comment on Hunter Biden, also the court decision that his possession?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna just let that one ride all by itself. You guys can handle that one without me. It is very interesting, but you know that the Hunter Biden walks and that woman whose kid took the gun to school pled guilty. So we have some very mixed precedents that are coming, and mixed precedents is a good way to end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think this would be a very supportive court on gun possession and cannabis. So I'm not at all discouraged by the idea of our case going to the Supreme Court.
Well, well, let's wrap this up then and tell us how people can find out more about what you're doing, Florida Cannabis Network, Action Network, and what's it look like of potential dates of when cannabis at the Capitol is going to be held.
Oh, you know, you're going to have to tell your team that. We've got a couple things going on over the next couple months. We are a membership organization, FLCAN.org/join. And I like to tell people, you know, there was a time where people tithed and they gave money to, you know, organizations that they felt like were really feeding them. So if you learned something tonight and you feel like that I fed your spirit in some way or fed your intellect, I would just really be grateful for you to make your best donation to Cannabis Action Network, FLCAN.org. Get on the main page. There's some donate buttons. It shouldn't be that hard to donate. And if it is that hard to donate, I need a really big check so we can get someone to redo the website, because it should not be that hard to donate money. We are going to be doing a kayak trip, a bioluminescence kayak trip in Brevard County next month, October 22nd. We are participating with the Medical Marijuana Business Association. That will be a one-day forum in Tallahassee. Trulieve is the prime sponsor. I understand that Kim herself is on the program, and a number of lawmakers will be participating. That's a Monday in October, and it is also one of the committee weeks. So our legislative committee will begin meeting again very shortly, probably in the next 2 weeks. And then we'll decide things like what's really the most important thing to the people that we serve. want to get involved, you can make that great donation. You can stay involved with the Libertarian Party because Hector is going to make sure that we're doing the right thing. You can join as a member yourself. And you can follow us on all of the social media channels. We have a fabulous woman, Dana Niffen from the Panhandle, who is doing social media for us. But we always need more hands on deck.
Great. Appreciate your time so much. Without further ado, we're gonna, thanks, Ed. We'll close out tonight, and hopefully we'll have you back again after the legislative session. We can share some great news.
Wouldn't that be fun? Thanks everybody for sticking with us tonight. It was a pleasure being with all of you.